Welcome to the SmartKeys podcast. Imagine walking into a busy store, and instead of just browsing the aisles, like over half the customers are actively hiding behind displays just to avoid making eye contact with the sales staff.
Right, which sounds ridiculous in a physical store.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in the B2B software world, that's not a hypothetical at all. It's actually the current reality. Today, 53% of B2B buyers say they prefer to buy with absolutely zero interaction from a sales rep. Zero.
I mean, that statistic really just represents a massive fundamental shift in buyer psychology. We are moving away from that era where the vendor held all the information, and the buyer just had to patiently endure this heavily guarded theatrical process just to see how a tool functioned. Today's professionals, they simply don't have the time or the patience really to sit through a 30-minute slide deck about your company's history when they are just trying to solve an immediate problem.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we are doing a deep dive today into the Product-Led Growth Playbook by Felix Römer. We're looking at the full text published on smartkeys.org, so treat this as a definitive, really comprehensive resource for modern professionals trying to optimize business efficiency right now.
Because the pressures are really compounding out there.
Oh, totally. The playbook points out that 67% of companies are actively tightening their software budgets. And even worse, an alarming 71% of users will just churn. They'll abandon a piece of software within their first 90 days.
Yeah, so that old motion of forcing a buyer through a rigid sales funnel, it's just demonstrably broken at this point.
Right. So the mission for today's deep dive is to explore the solution Römer outlines, which is the core concept of product-led growth, or PLG.
Yeah, at its heart, PLG is really about completely flipping that classic sales script. Instead of relying on a human being to tell a prospective buyer about the value on a call, you use the product itself to show them.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly. The software essentially becomes your primary demand engine. It's your best marketer and your most effective sales rep.
Let's anchor that with an analogy, because I think it helps visualize it. The traditional sales-led model feels a bit like a bakery operating behind a locked vault.
Right.
You walk up because you're hungry, but a person in a suit stops you on the sidewalk, and they absolutely refuse to let you inside until you watch a presentation about the premium yeast they use.
Yeah, and then they demand you sign a 6-month contract before you even know if the bread is stale.
Exactly. It's crazy when you put it like that. But product-led growth, by contrast, it throws the doors wide open, they bring the ovens right to the front, and they hand you a warm piece of sourdough right there on the sidewalk. You taste it, the quality is undeniable, and you naturally just walk to the counter to buy a full loaf. The barrier to entry is it's completely gone.
That perfectly illustrates the whole mechanism of PLG. By lowering that initial friction, you allow the user to self-educate. They experience the value firsthand. And this is key, this shift requires a complete overhaul of how we measure success.
Right, because for the longest time, the main metric was the MQL, right? The marketing qualified lead.
Yes.
Which, let's be honest, usually just meant someone filled out a form to download a PDF, or maybe they registered for a webinar.
Precisely. And the flaw with the MQL is that consuming content just does not equate to purchase intent. Someone reading your white paper about productivity, they're just researching a problem.
They aren't necessarily ready to buy your specific solution.
Right. So the playbook explains that in a product-led growth model, the new gold standard is the PQL, the product qualified lead. This fundamentally changes the dynamic because a PQL is based entirely on behavioral data.
So it's triggered by what a user is actively doing inside your software. The playbook uses Slack as a benchmark for this, which I found really fascinating. Slack doesn't rely on arbitrary timelines like a 14-day window to decide when a team is ready for a paid plan. They wait until an account hits a very specific threshold, 2,000 messages sent.
Yeah, and the logic behind that 2,000 message mark is what makes it so incredibly powerful. Slack's data science team discovered that once a workspace crosses that exact line, the behavior shifts.
Like they aren't just testing the interface anymore.
Right. At 2,000 messages, that team has basically integrated the software into their daily operations. The product has successfully solved their communication problem, proving its worth. And it's only when that specific usage signal fires that the sales team gets a green light to reach out.
Because the intent isn't theoretical anymore.
Exactly, it's proven.
But wait, that brings up a really critical tension here. If the product is out there functioning as the primary demand engine, handing out the free samples, onboarding the user, proving the value automatically, does that mean the traditional sales team is just obsolete? I mean, are we looking at a future where sales reps are engineered out of the process entirely?
It's a really natural conclusion to draw, but the playbook is very clear that sales is not dead, not at all.
Okay, so where do they fit in?
Instead, what we see is the rise of a hybrid motion. The role of the sales professional actually elevates. Think about it. You don't want an expensive human sales team wasting cycles trying to convince a small 5-person startup to buy a basic subscription.
Right, the self-serve product handles that beautifully on its own.
Exactly. But when a Fortune 500 company has, say, organically adopted your tool across a few disparate teams, and now they want to deploy it globally to 10,000 employees, the product alone cannot close that deal.
Because at that scale, the buyer isn't just looking at features. They are dealing with rigid corporate infrastructure.
Exactly the point. Enterprise deals require humans. You need them to navigate complex security audits, ensure compliance with international data laws, secure procurement approvals, and just align multiple department heads.
Right.
So in this hybrid model, the product does the prospecting. It identifies the high-value accounts through those PQLs, and then the sales team steps in as expert consultants to really shepherd those massive deals through all the organizational red tape.
So it's really about deploying human capital where it has the absolute highest leverage.
Precisely.
Which kind of transitions us nicely to the strategic side of things. If a business commits to letting the product do the heavy lifting, they have to deliberately choose their delivery engine, right? The playbook highlights two main ones, the freemium model and the free trial.
Yeah, and choosing between those two is probably one of the most consequential decisions a leadership team can make. It dictates your entire customer acquisition cost.
Right, so let's break down the mechanics. Freemium provides a basic version of the software for free, indefinitely, but places limits on usage or features. And the text notes this is exceptionally potent when a product possesses inherent network effects.
Yeah, Figma and Dropbox are the classic examples there.
Because the design of the tool itself naturally encourages sharing.
That's the core mechanism, yeah. With Figma, a designer creates a mock-up, but to get feedback, they have to invite a copywriter, a PM, maybe an engineer. Because that base tier is free, those invited colleagues can join instantly with zero friction.
So the freemium tier effectively turns your user base into a viral marketing agency.
Exactly. But not every tool is collaborative. If you are building highly specialized single-player software, freemium might actually not make sense.
And that's where the free trial comes in, typically a 14 to 30-day window. So why is that restriction sometimes more effective?
Well, a time-bound free trial is superior when your software requires a significant investment of time to really understand, or when the aha moment, so to speak, is buried within advanced features.
Like if it needs a complex data integration before it actually shows any insights.
Right. A limited freemium tier might prevent the user from ever seeing the true value in that case, but a 14-day trial that grants full, unrestricted access to all the premier features that creates a sense of urgency. The ticking clock motivates the user to actually dedicate an afternoon to setting it up so they can properly evaluate it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, regardless of the model chosen, the playbook emphasizes this concept called activation. And it really warns businesses against falling for vanity metrics.
Oh, vanity metrics are dangerous.
Right, because a raw sign-up or just creating an account is a terrible metric to celebrate if the user logs in once, gets confused, and just never comes back.
Yeah, vanity metrics can create a completely false sense of security for an entire company. True activation is not a sign-up. True activation is defining a singular, specific behavioral event that actually statistically predicts long-term retention.
The example Felix Römer gives regarding Calendly perfectly illustrates this. Initially, Calendly assumed a user was activated the moment they booked their very first meeting through the platform.
Which logically makes sense on the surface.
Right. The tool was used for its intended purpose. But when their team dug into the analytics, they realized that users who only booked one meeting had a massive churn rate. They were still abandoning the platform. So Calendly completely shifted their activation metric from 1 meeting booked to 5 meetings booked.
And the rationale behind changing that target to 5 is deeply rooted in user psychology. Booking 1 meeting might just be a curiosity test, right? The user is just kicking the tires. But when a user facilitates 5 separate meetings through the platform, they have actively altered their workflow. They've experienced the time-saving benefits repeatedly, and that begins to forge a real habit.
And once you identify that habit-forming threshold, your entire engineering and onboarding team has a clear directive, which is to remove every ounce of friction, preventing a new user from reaching that 5th meeting. Wait, I do want to push back on the monetization aspect here, particularly with the freemium model.
Mhm.
If a company meticulously removes all the friction and delivers immense value in the free tier, what is the incentive for the user to ever pull out their credit card? Like, how does a business avoid the pitfall of being so over-generous that they just bankrupt themselves supporting free users?
It's a really delicate balance, and overgenerosity is definitely a common trap. The strategic insight from the playbook is that paywalls must be designed around natural usage milestones rather than arbitrary timers or gates.
Okay, so triggering the upgrade prompt at the exact moment they're getting the most value.
Exactly. Consider Zoom's implementation of the 40-minute limit on free group calls.
Right, it's not a random 12-minute or 50-minute cutoff.
No, the 40-minute mark is highly calculated. It is generous enough to allow a team to conduct a meaningful, productive meeting. They experience the crystal clear audio, the easy screen sharing. But right as a professional meeting enters its final stages, when you are finalizing action items or trying to close a pitch with a client, the limit approaches.
Oh, wow. So the friction is introduced precisely when the professional need for uninterrupted time is at its absolute highest.
Exactly. The free tier proves the concept, but the limitations literally compel a business user to upgrade just to maintain their professional workflow.
That is brilliant. Okay, so moving from the strategy to the execution. Getting an entire organization to align around these concepts has to be incredibly complex because you often have marketing hyper-focused on lead volume, sales pushing for immediate revenue, and engineering is just isolated from customer feedback.
Right, they're all in silos.
Exactly. So how does a company structurally break down those silos to actually build this product-led engine?
You really need cross-functional frameworks that force every single department to look at the same data and pursue the same goals. The playbook details 3 foundational models to achieve this. The first is the AARR framework, so that's an acronym for acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue.
And the critical distinction the playbook makes here is that in a PLG motion, activation is elevated above almost everything else, right? The goal is to aggressively shrink what they call the time to value, or TTV.
Shrinking time to value is paramount. If a user signs up and they have to watch 3 tutorial videos and click through 6 configuration screens before they see a benefit, their attention will wane. They'll just leave.
Right.
So the AAR framework forces product teams to ask, how can we deliver a moment of genuine value within the first 3 minutes of the user opening the application?
Makes total sense. The second structural model mentioned is the hooked model, which deals explicitly with the psychology of habit formation. It breaks down into this continuous loop: a trigger, an action, a variable reward, and an investment.
Yeah, and applying this to B2B software is fascinating. The trigger might just be an email notification that a teammate tagged you in a document.
And the action is simply click and link to open the app.
Right. But the variable reward is crucial. In enterprise software, it isn't like a slot machine payout, right? It's the sudden, satisfying realization of efficiency. It's seeing a really complex data set instantly rendered into a beautiful, comprehensible chart.
Oh, I love that feeling.
We all do. And finally, the investment phase is when the user customizes their dashboard or imports their own data. Once they invest that personal effort, the switching costs become high, which naturally solidifies retention.
Now, the third framework challenges a very old business metaphor. It's the bow tie model, which essentially replaces the traditional sales funnel. Because in a standard funnel, the visual ends at the bottom the moment the customer makes a purchase. They just fall out of the funnel. But the bow tie model flips that on its side and expands outward after the purchase.
Yeah, because in software, the initial purchase is just the beginning of the relationship.
Right.
The bow tie visualizes how a single user's success should expand outward into retention, cross-selling, and organic referrals. Instead of constantly pouring expensive marketing dollars into the top of a funnel, you rely on growth loops where satisfied users naturally bring in their colleagues, compounding your growth.
But to track any of this, to know if your time to value is actually shrinking or if your growth loops are working, you can't just rely on gut feelings. The playbook emphasizes the need for a robust data stack. It specifically points out that you need tools that track behavioral events, like Mixpanel or Heap.
Yes, behavioral event data provides the quantitative truth. It strips away all the assumptions. Your design team might honestly believe the onboarding flow is super intuitive, but Mixpanel will show you that, 60% of users abandon the process at step 3.
But quantitative data only tells you where the problem's occurring. To understand why, the playbook pairs that with qualitative tools like Full Story, which provides actual session replays,
Yeah.
meaning you can actually watch an anonymized playback of a user's mouse movements and clicks.
It is often a deeply humbling experience for product managers, let me tell you. You might watch a recording where a user is just frantically clicking around a menu, completely missing the primary call to action button because the color contrast is poor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, session replays remove the guesswork, allowing those cross-functional teams to pinpoint exact areas of friction and resolve them collaboratively.
And the financial impact of this deep alignment is pretty undeniable. The text highlights that businesses leveraging this kind of behavioral data to personalize the user experience see massive returns. 89% of marketers report measurable ROI from targeted in-product experiences.
That's huge.
It is. Furthermore, businesses operating this way aim for expansion revenue, meaning upsells, and adding more suites to eventually account for roughly 30% of their total revenue.
And that 30% expansion figure, that's really the hallmark of a healthy PLG company. It proves that your product is so indispensable that your existing customers are willingly paying you more over time without a sales rep ever having to cold call them.
Which brings us to the roadmap, because transitioning a traditional sales-led company into a product-led powerhouse sounds like an absolute operational nightmare. You can't just flip a switch on a Friday and expect the software to start selling itself by Monday. How does leadership actually manage this evolution?
Felix Römer is highly pragmatic about this. He outlines a strategic 12-plus month roadmap broken into 4 distinct phases, ensuring the organization evolves systematically rather than just, descending into chaos. Phase 1 is foundation.
So this is essentially getting the plumbing right.
Exactly that. Before you change your pricing or fire up new marketing campaigns, you have to instrument your analytics. You implement tools like Mixpanel, and you force the entire leadership team to agree on your single activation metric. You cannot proceed until you have defined your equivalent of Calendly's 5 meetings.
Okay, so once that baseline is established, phase 2 is optimization. And this is where the focus turns to speed, right?
Yes, in optimization, the engineering and product teams run rapid, iterative experiments to aggressively shrink that time to value. They simplify menus, they remove mandatory form fields, they streamline the onboarding.
And this is also the phase where you introduce PQL scoring.
Right. Your data stack begins automatically flagging those highly active users and routing them to your sales team as warm leads.
Then, as the engine really starts humming, you enter phase 3, scale. This is where monetization strategies are refined.
Scale is when you look critically at your packaging. You might adjust your freemium feature limits based on the usage data you've gathered, or you might refine the length of your free trial to maximize conversion. Crucially, you also build in retention mechanics like automated tips or collaboration hooks just to ensure users don't churn after their initial success.
And finally, phase 4 is advanced PLG. This is sort of the forward-looking horizon for the industry.
Yeah, once the foundation, optimization, and scaling phases are operating smoothly, a company can deploy AI personalization and predictive success models. Yeah, the analytics become sophisticated enough to spot subtle behavioral patterns that indicate a user is getting frustrated. The system can then intervene automatically, perhaps, by triggering an in-app tutorial or alerting a customer success manager, effectively stopping churn before the user even realizes they were going to cancel.
That is incredible. But for you listening right now, the practical takeaway isn't to be overwhelmed by the prospect of building predictive AI models today. That is phase 4. If you want to start leveraging this playbook tomorrow, start this week with 3 grounded steps. First, instrument your analytics so you can actually observe how users interact with your tool. Second, define your single activation event. Find that exact moment where your user derives undeniable value. And third, run just one focused experiment aimed at reducing the friction it takes to get them to that moment.
That is the perfect starting point, because the entire philosophy rests on making the product the undeniable proof of your company's value, which really leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider. If your software product had to step in tomorrow and act as your organization's absolute only salesperson, what is the very first feature it would need to show a new user to instantly seal the deal?
That is the ultimate clarifying question. Find that feature, remove every barrier around it, and get it into your customers' hands as fast as possible. Thank you for tuning in to the SmartKeys podcast. If you want to dive even deeper into these strategies, we highly encourage you to read the full Product-Led Growth Playbook by Felix Römer on smartkeys.org. You can find the direct link right there in the show notes. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a deep dive. Until next time.